really well. So an example, I like Zendesk has a really strong brand presence. Their mission is all about the best customer experiences are built with Zendesk. And so on the next slide, I'm just going to show two different launch copy and messaging, and one is for a bigger launch, a new product that a new feature that they added, and the other one is just a small micro release note on their app store, which happens every couple of weeks. And you can see here, if you can read this, that it both ties back to that North Star about customer experiences. So they're able to just weave that in and ground their users no matter what feature they're talking about. And that can even apply to deprecations, which I'm going to talk about as well. And it's, with this, it's really all about consistency. Okay, so next, is all about letting your users be part of the journey. So this is about the product development process, which product marketing, should have a huge role in. And oftentimes, you want to put it in front of your users as soon as possible. And so the risk here is that you might introduce something that will go away or change. And with all of these iterations, you risk losing the trust of your audience. So I have a couple suggestions of how to navigate that and how to tease out to the audience that something might change, but flip it so that they actually are gaining more trust with the brand and becoming closer to the product. So one example, at Meetup recently, we tested in a small pilot in a couple of states group ratings. This feature was all about, so on Meetup you can explore groups and events to find one that you'd like to attend, or you're an organizer who is hosting this local community. So it can be very personal for people, and the idea of ratings will help people find great groups and events for them. But on the flip side, our organizers put so much heart and soul into what they're doing that we wanted to tread really lightly, because a rating can be a very personal thing. So when we introduced this, we had this modal where we made our users part of the product development process and just very plainly said, share your feedback on this feature. So there's a couple of reasons why this can work. It builds trust, so it brings them into the product development process. 2, like I mentioned, it sets the expectation that something could possibly change. 3, it can be a great outlet for your user base to express themselves, whether good or bad. It's nice to just invite that, because as we all know, our customers are gonna talk about how they feel about the brand anyway, and so it's nice to just up front invite that. And 4th, it's actually really useful. So asking for feedback is not just, an empty lip service of, yes, we'd like to hear from you. This should be a really important part of the product development process, and something that the product team should weigh when iterating. And this came up earlier about the product marketer's role of bringing that qualitative feedback in. So this is just one of those ways to bring that voice and loop back to the product team. And in this example, we ended up using the qualitative feedback and taking it really seriously, because what we heard was that our organizers did feel really sensitive about this idea of being rated publicly. So we transitioned the feature into being viewable by them and being able to share helpful feedback about how to make their group better, but not putting it so front and center that it was visible to everyone. And we echoed this in the announcement email about this, where we said this feature will continue to evolve based on your feedback. So it's teasing out this idea of, hey, this is early in the product development process, this is subject to change, and we want to loop you in. So in a similar vein to the early development process, soft launches can be great, and this example is about a private beta. So this is another way to set the expectation that it's early, and as you know, there's often a push-pull between product and product marketing on how polished an experience should be before you roll it out to users. So I think that a closed invite-only beta is a really wonderful way to solve for that, because being part of something exclusive, they're gonna be more willing to forgive bugs or 404s or whatever they might encounter in there. So one example is from an Adobe product that I worked on there called Adobe Portfolio. And we were able to protect the brand by doing this closed beta and in letting people request access and then granting it, in batches. So it had that exclusive feel. People were excited to be a part of it. They were able to help in the product development process, and then that also naturally helps create great brand ambassadors for you, because that group of early testers know that they were there in the beginning. They're going to want to talk about that and share. Okay, let's talk about deprecations. I don't think this has come up a lot today, but this can often be a big part of a product marketer's job as well, as you roll back and sunset certain features, you want to message that out and not just sweep it under the rug. So my advice here is all around transparency. Rip off the Band-Aid, treat your audience like adults, and just tell them why. An example I like is when Spotify sunset the inbox feature, which I personally used all the time. I think it was really useful, but apparently had a pretty niche audience. So they just said that. They said, hey, guess what? This feature was used by a small amount of people, and it was a huge tech cost for us to keep it running. And so we've made the difficult decision to remove it. This is not done all that often, but I think it's really, when I handle deprecations, I even like to go a step further and sometimes say, 1.5% of our user base touched this feature in the last X months. So you can use data to your advantage and just share, like this is how we went about making this decision, and maybe even share a bit about the tech cost of keeping the feature live. And at Meetup, we have actually a focus group all about focusing and making sure every feature that we keep up and maintain is helping solve a main customer problem. And so you're forced to make difficult decisions and sunset things that aren't going to move your business forward. Okay, so in the Spotify example, we looked at how transparency can be powerful. But I want to take this a step further and show you how it can actually be used to turn critics into advocates. So this is all about bringing our users closer. So when your users are separated from product decisions, it's easy for them to feel isolated and angry about things that might not be there anymore or may have changed. When you do this, something really special happens. So to go back to an example from Adobe, we had a certain person named Ken come out of the woodwork with every single change that we made. Didn't matter what it was. He was always threatening to cancel his account. In this example, the background color functionality was no longer, we had removed it. So he would write in to our team, and then of course he was going to take to Twitter as well. And we found that transparency worked really well. So when we shared the design thinking behind a certain change, that helped diffuse the situation. And it was honest. We said, well, yes, we moved the button for adding a caption, but that actually helped 30% more people find the tool, and it reduced our questions 10 times. For the background color example, and I think this is on an artist's portfolio, we said, well, you know what, that bright pink background was not doing you any favors. We found the data showed that bright backgrounds got 5 times less views. So we're all about helping you optimize people who see your work. And that really worked. Of course, people are always going to come out of the woodwork and share how they feel about a change you've made. So this would happen, but then we noticed something funny start to happen. Kenneth would come out of the woodwork. So armed with that design thinking that we had shared with him, he was out there defending us. So it's possible to transform your biggest brand critics into brand advocates. And I do want to show you Kenneth today because it has come full circle. And I think this was last year or 2 years ago. He was up on the Adobe stage at the yearly conference sharing his creative process. Okay, so we've talked about the earlier parts of the product development process so far. and how to handle when you're iterating and in the early stages, and including your audience in that. So when it is time to go big, celebrate with your audience. I think it can be a really great moment to bring that full circle and celebrate with them. Nike is notorious for testing, iterating, and collaborating with their users in their product development process. So in fact, they have a whole center dedicated to it, which is the Nike Explorer Team Sport Research Lab. They're letting people test their shoes, they're sending them out, they're bringing them into the lab, and then when it is time to go big with a launch, Nike is known for celebrating the stories of the people that use their products. And you can see this woven in to their mission statement. So this is back to the North Star that we had talked about. One of theirs is, if you have a body, you're an athlete. And you can see this in everything that they put out. It ties it back into this. So one campaign that Nike did timed with the New York City Marathon, where they were launching a new set of apparel and shoes. They did a big campaign all about celebrating real athletes and their stories from New York and how they overcame something in order to be there that day and run the New York City Marathon. Okay, so this is just one example of how they're celebrating user stories with the same people who are participating with the brand. Okay, so we have talked about, I have one more lesson for you, a couple of different ways to navigate these twists and turns and still tell a really strong story. We haven't focused so much on results, but this is, thinking about the positioning and how to weave a thread through no matter what is happening with your products and their iterations. So from gracefully handling big changes to building loyalty by including your users in your product development process. So I want to leave you with one more lesson, and I think we'll have time to take questions if there are any. So there's one more way to truly avoid being on the biggest marketing blunders list, like we saw with the Samsung phone, and all of the other examples. So that is around defining the minimum marketable product. So we all know about the minimum viable product, but there's also an inflection point that you should define as a product marketer of when is the right moment to actually talk about this thing. It's probably not going to be right when the MVP comes out, even though your product team might be pushing for that. So I encourage you to think about what features of the product need to exist before you're able to market it. Yes, you're going to have some role when the MVP comes out. You need baseline messaging and positioning. There's going to be a whole host of things you need the very first time something is live. But then there's a moment a little later on when all the right features are there that you feel like you can really go big and hit your KPIs of what you're trying to do with this product. And that is this marketing push right here, the minimum marketable product. So the whole idea is that you have enough features to deliver the promise of what you're selling. So here's an example that did not do this well. Firefest. So they sold something that was not in line with the features, and this is what the features look like. So this is an example of a full mismatch between marketing and the product. So we do much better when we're aligned with these two things and when we are able to impact the product development process and use some of these lessons. Thank you. All right, I think we have a little time for questions.
Oh. Hey there, thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
I work for a B2B company, and we work very closely with our growth marketing team. Mm-hmm. And I guess I would like to open this up for anyone in the room, but one thing we're experiencing is we want to run a lot of A/B tests to test things and see where we can grow and get more new users. But one thing we're running into is we don't know when to communicate those tests internally. Do we tell sales about every single test we're running? We balance over-communicating that they don't need to know about every test, but we also don't want to catch them off guard. Do you have any advice when it comes to that?
Yeah, and I think a good comp for that for me is I work really closely with our customer success team. So it's when do we have public-facing information to help people use this feature? We have an internal rule that it's only when the split test is over. So there is going to be, we do provide documentation for responses to questions about a split test, but it's only when you've analyzed how it went and chosen the A or B that it should be, used for sales or customer success. That's what we do, at least. I think there's a lot of ways to do it, and it's very fluid, but that has worked well for us. Yes?
Following on that,
Mhm.
how is product? I'm on the phone with the customer and I say, but it's right, and actually,
Mm-hmm.
how often has that been? Ignore it.
Yeah, so for us, we have a way, and in my past experiences also, we have a way of seeing what experience one user would be in, so we can see that attribute when we're looking into them. So on a one-to-one, to answer questions and things like that, you can see what they're seeing. But I think it does lead to a bigger question of knowing that your product is in a fluid state and there are different states going on. So it does make it harder for marketing, like we've talked about, but yeah, I think it's more, you need to have some guardrails around how long a test is going to happen, so you'll know, as the marketer at least, how contained, this test is going to be a couple of weeks, and then everyone will have the same experience.
I had a
Yes.
question, Sarah. Thanks so much for speaking. I was curious about, thinking about your idea of celebrating the wins with the customer. I'm curious if you have a way that you catalog their feedback so that you can then do that celebration on a more individualized basis, or how you think about that more broadly.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think about that from an internal standpoint, like sharing it within your team, and then external. So I've found that the product team can be pretty removed from those individual customer voices, and I think it's a really important cultural part of a product marketer's job to be that voice of the customer internally. So at Meetup at least, I contribute to a voice of the customer presentation that we do every once in a while, and have a Slack channel of member stories, and then when possible, we can tie someone's qualitative feedback back to how we tweaked it based on that, if it was something that a lot of people were saying and the data was showing that we should change it, and we had all these supporting voices. So it's really important to do that internally, and then externally, I think you can do it in any number of ways and weave it into marketing, but I really love that sentiment of celebrate the wins with your users and say, we heard you. This is what's different now because of what you said. Any other questions? One more.
Thank you again, Sarah. I had a question about the minimal marketable product. I thought that was genius. Do you have some examples that you could share between the criteria that you label as an MMP versus an MVP?
Yeah, well, I think during the discussion earlier, someone was talking about tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 features, and that's a really smart way to think about it, of going back to the core of what you're trying to do. So yes, you want to get something out fast, but what problem are you trying to solve for the user? And generally, you're going to be able to bring that down to like 3 key features. Like, we absolutely need this, this, and this. And so that's a good way to step back with the product team and say, there's a metric that you are, whether it is feature usage or sales, like you're driving something with every product. And so I think the most compelling thing to do is share with the product team when you're pushing back in that way, how not having the tier 1 features is going to contribute to you not hitting the metric that you're trying to hit. And coming out too early, loses brand equity, and you sometimes only get one chance with a user. They might not necessarily know that they're in an early experience, so you have to really protect that because sometimes people just don't come back.
All right, one more question. No? All right. Thank you,
Great,
Sarah.
thank you.